Hi, everybody. Welcome along to episode 153 of Percussion Discussion Podcast. Hope you're all well and happy out there. Please check out all of our social media. You can find us on Facebook and Instagram. Of course, our world famous YouTube channel, where you can find all of the conversations past and present with the video to accompany. Please subscribe. There's no adverts on there, so there's nothing to get in your way. It just keeps you updated when a new video pops up. And there's lots of other bits and pieces on there from drum clinics that I've hosted and things. So some cool stuff. If you'd rather listen on the go, all of the conversations are available in podcast form. These are free to download from your favorite podcast provider. If you could rate and review, that would be very kind. And I really appreciate it. And it helps grow the channel and hopefully get more people enjoying the channel. So there we go. On to today's guest. One of the busiest UK drummers. He's played for the likes of Tony Christie. He's currently playing for Leo Sayer. He's done a tour with Tony Hadley. He's done more West End shows than you can shake a stick at. Vastly experienced drummer and teacher, educator. It gives me huge pleasure to welcome the wonderful Mr. Elliott Henshaw. Elliott, thanks so much for doing this, mate.
Not a problem, mate. Good to see you.
Yeah, likewise. It's been a while in the making, but we're here, and we're both fairly fresh-faced considering the hours we've been putting in. You were in Scotland last night, weren't you?
Yeah, up in Glasgow at the Royal Concert Hall there.
That's a beautiful venue.
It's amazing. It was sold out last night. It was a series of concerts I've been doing with like a Christmas Rat Pack show.
Oh, nice.
It's the three Rat Pack guys that were doing the West End Rat Pack back in... God, when did I join them? I moved to London in 2002, and that was one of the first gigs I got. Originally depping for Matt Skelton.
Oh, right, yeah.
And then Matt got busy with John Wilson, so the gig eventually became mine, and we did about 4 years in the West End. And these guys, the guys that play Frank Dean and Sammy, then they're still doing it now, and for me, they're the best ones doing that.
Is it Steve Triffitt or is it somebody else? Oh, yeah. There's nobody. Yeah,
nobody better. No, I've been doing loads with them all year, really. They have a regular gig at Boysdale's in Canary Wharf that I go down and do. And when we're not doing the concert halls with the Christmas show with the full big band in December, we're at Boysdale's doing it like a quartet. So,
that's perfect.
It's great. It's really good. It kind of scratches that big band itch of mine, which has always been my first love, really, I guess.
Yeah, and it's something that you do. I don't want to blow smoke up your backside, but it's something you do very well. I have to say, I've seen you do it a few times, and it seems to be your thing.
Yeah.
One of your things, should we say?
One of them. Yeah, I think that I've told the story a million times, so forgive me if you've heard it before. But for me, it was the first love, because I very potted history. I started off playing the violin when I was 7 at primary school, in the days where you got free lessons, in the good old days.
Very much.
A big regret, actually. I mean, I got to grade 4 on violin. I was terrible, really. I struggled with the reading music aspect. I just had a pretty good ear, so I just used to copy what my teacher was playing, and somehow got to grade 4 standard. But looking back, I remember vividly them coming into school, in the primary school, saying you can either learn piano or violin, and daftly I chose violin. I should have gone with piano because my harmonic knowledge is terrible. That's my one regret. But and then when I was about, 9 or 10, my dad, who's still listens to a lot of Buddy Holly, Bill Haley, Little Richard, that early rock and roll stuff. So I was listening to all that at home. And I got into the saxophone because a lot of those Little Richard records have great saxophone solos. So I thought, I've got to try a bit of that. So my dad got me an alto. And of course, listening to all the music and, learning about the saxophone, it was like, this is a jazz instrument. So I started getting into jazz. And my dad said when I was 11, there's a great American jazz band coming to a place called the Davenport Theatre in Stockport.
Yeah.
And he said, I'll take you to see it. So we all went out as a family to watch this American band, and it was the Buddy Rich Band. So that was that. Saxophone went away, violin went away. I'm like, I'm doing that. That's for me. And that was in November 86, and Buddy died in April 87, so I caught him right at the end. I was dead lucky.
Yeah.
And of course, I didn't know who I was seeing. I was just like mesmerized by it. And then that became the quest after that. So really, from about the age of 11 or 12 up to really about 18, all I was listening to was Buddy Rich. Then I discovered Louis Belson, Gene Krupa, obviously. And then it was all big band. So that was really, you know, my formative years I was just listening to big band stuff. So that's why I think it is still my first love. I mean, there's nothing more exciting than when you've got 17 musicians on stage and you're playing that music. It's incredible.
It's phenomenal. So you know, because I know you've worked with Andy Pryor. That was probably your first gig, I'd imagine.
First pro gig, proper pro gig. Yeah, I've been playing in pubs and doing weddings and stuff, but that was the first. Like, oh, okay, now I've got to behave.
Yeah, well, and he had a great band as well. And you know, I think people underestimate how big Andy was at that time. You know, he was one of the biggest stars in that genre of music around, wasn't he? Let's be honest.
Well, I always say this to people. He was like a Michael Bublé of the day, really. You know, he was a big. I remember there being a big television special on Granada TV up north did about him, a 1 hour special, and I remember seeing that when I was sort of at school when I was 16 or 17, you know, never thinking one day I'd end up playing for him. And I started playing for him when I was 21. I was playing in the Salford University big band. That's where I studied. Those were my first kind of formal education on drums, really. I was having one-to-one lessons with a beautiful guy, an incredible drummer called Steve Gilbert.
Yes, indeed. That name.
Yeah, and I'd got into the Salford big band. Eventually, I didn't get in my first couple of years there because I couldn't read. I'm self-taught, so I didn't know how to read, and you had to be able to read to get in the band. So I spent a year teaching myself to sight read. Got the gig, and in my first one or two of my first gigs there, a wonderful trumpet player called Malcolm Melling, who was playing lead trumpet with the Andy Pryor band at the time. He saw me play with the Salford University big band, and he knew Andy was looking for a new drummer, and kind of offered me the gig, really. And so in my final sort of 18 months at Salford University, I sort of was doing this gig. The first sort of 6 months, we were doing a lot of kind of a few theatre shows and a few concerts and a few TV and radio appearances, you know, and you sort of quickly realise, okay, this is proper now, you know. And then he started doing a big show called The Magic of Sinatra, which was like 100 dates a year we were doing, you know, travelling all up and down the country. And I was in my final year at uni then, so I was trying to balance the two because I wanted to finish uni, I wanted to get my degree. But that was, Andy was phenomenal. I caught up with Andy earlier this year. You know, he's not singing anymore, unfortunately.
I know.
He does occasionally, but nothing like he used to. But the last time I gigged with him, I mean, I was with him for 8 years, and then I moved to London, and you know, things got a little difficult. But I'd say maybe a couple of years before lockdown, I got a call to go and do a gig at a place called Goresworth Hall, which is a National Trust place in Macclesfield, big outdoor show with him. And I was like, yeah, I'll definitely do that. And, you know, I'd say it had been probably 12 years since I'd worked with him, and his voice was better than ever. I mean, he was, you know, he could have been as big as anyone. He's unbelievable singer. Unbelievable.
Do you know what I like about Andy? He delivers a song brilliantly, but he doesn't try and sound like anybody else. He sounds like Andy Pryor. You hear him talk and you go, that's how he sings. There's nothing fake at all.
Yeah, he was absolutely not a tribute act. You know, and even in as much as he would do Sinatra songs and Tony Bennett songs and all those classic songs, but he would have a guy called Brian Pendleton arrange brand new arrangements for the band, so they were specific to Andy Pryor and Andy's band, and it was great. You know, you felt like you were part of something new and original. You know.
Oh, it was a magical band. I'm a singer as well, and I've sang in a band with Andy a few times, well, loads of times in fact, where he'd always do the Sinatra because I wouldn't touch that if he was on the gig. He'd be like, "No, that's your," and I'd do all the other stuff, you know. And he, great front man, funny, and a great trombone player and a great drummer as well.
I know.
No pressure there, eh?
No pressure at all. Well, interestingly, you know, he taught me a lot about playing the drums. You know, because again, you know, going into going into that band at 21, I'd only started having formal lessons at 18, but I'd been playing the drums since I was sort of 12, 13. And of course, all I'd really been listening to was Buddy Rich and it, you know, Gene Krupa, Lou Bells, and drum orientated stuff. And suddenly I'm back in a singer. And about 3 or 4 gigs in, you know, he got me in his dressing room. He said, "Look, if you carry on playing the way you're playing, I'm going to have to let you go." I'm like, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, you're filling all over the lyrics. You know, it's not about you, this. It's my name on the poster." I'm like, "Oh, okay." And he said, "Go and check out Irv Cutler playing with Frank Sinatra. Buy all those records and listen to what he does." And it completely changed the way I play big band, certainly back in a singer, but even instrumental big band. And it certainly had an effect on the way I played pop music and, you know, any kind of music really, where the simpler approach is best and just add to it rather than take away, you know.
Oh, well, do you know, way back at the very beginning of this podcast, around episode 20, or late 20s, I can't remember, we had I had Duffy Jackson on as a guest, you know, and the late Duffy Jackson, wonderful. And he was, you know, he's got plenty up his sleeve, or had plenty up his sleeve. We were talking about backing artists, you know. Lena Horne, I think, was one, and he was just saying, "Oh, it's just stripped away totally," and you know, let's just and it was fascinating, and you've just echoed what he's said basically.
Well, one thing I did was to make it easier to play like that, because I was young, I was like excitable on the drums. I was massively into players who had chops and could push the boundaries of technique. You know, I would, around that time I was discovering, you know, Dennis Chambers, Dave Weckl, Vinny, all those guys. And what I used to do to get into that mind zone of, right, this is not about the drums, this is about backing the singer or backing whatever soloist was playing. I used to learn the lyrics. I still do learn the lyrics to the songs, and I'll sing along while I'm playing. And what that means is if I want to go for a fill, but I know that fill's going to get in the way of what I'm singing, then it's definitely going to get in the way of what they're.
Okay.
So that's how I sort of tame the beast, so to speak.
So don't have the overheads too hot on a gig when Elliott's on drums.
Well, this is it. And what that led to eventually was, because I do Leo Sayers' gig. I've done the Leo's gig for about 11 years now. The lead guitarist with Leo, fabulous musician and guitarist Dave Day, he was doing BVs with Leo when... So I got the Leo gig in 2013. I got Dave on board because I used to play with Dave in Tony Christie's band for a long time. Leo was looking for a new guitarist. I recommended Dave. Dave came on board, and he straight away started singing backing vocals with Leo, because Dave is a fantastic frontman as well, fantastic lead singer. And he clocked that I was singing along as well. He said, "Well, why don't you do BVs?" And I'm like, "I've never done BVs in my life. You know, I've not got a great voice, as in I couldn't do lead, but I can pitch, you know." So
that's the important bit.
Yeah, blending in with everyone else, it's fine. So I've got a mic now. So all 4 of us in Leo's band, the bass player Richard Hammond and Steve Reed Williams on keys, we all do BVs behind Leo, and it's a great thing. So, and again, that changes the way I play the drums on that gig, you know.
Absolutely. So I mean, tell me about that gig, because is that a click gig, or is it all live? That all
live.
Lovely.
Always has been. It's
cool.
Yeah, it's proper. It's you know, it's keys, bass, drums, and guitar, and everyone's the best at what they do. Leo is fantastic to work for. He doesn't micromanage it. He knows what he wants, and he's brilliant at giving you instruction on how he wants the song to go and where he wants the builds to be, and how, you know, where he thinks you should play a certain way. But then he's very much like, put your stamp on it, you know, and it's great because he's still prolifically writing new songs. Yeah, he does all his albums. He lives in Australia, just outside of Sydney, has done for a while now. And he's got a lovely home studio set up there. And all his albums he produces and records himself. He does everything on it, programs everything up. He plays a bit of guitar, a bit of keys. He's really good. But what he'll do is he'll send you, when he wants to play some of his new hits, his new songs live, he'll send you the album through, or the recording through, and then he'll say, "Don't try and replicate what I've done. Let's get together in a rehearsal room and let's workshop it." And we always do about 3 or 4 days rehearsal before a tour, and a lot of that is putting the new stuff together. And he allows you He wants your input. He's so, he's 76 now. He's still
Is
so
he?
passionate. Yeah, still so passionate about
he
music.
doesn't look it, does he? Because you see that big mop of hair, and it's like, oh, he's in his 50s, 60s.
And the way he acts on stage as well, and his voice is better than ever. As I say, I've been with him 11 years now, and this last tour we just finished in October, I've never heard him sing better. He's just unbelievable, and he's still so passionate about music, and still listening to loads of stuff, being inspired, writing, wants to perform, loves hanging with the band. And on top of that, he's still Leo Sayer. He's still an icon, and it's great. As I say, 11 years ago when I joined, he'd not really toured the UK much for a few years, and we were doing medium-sized venues, maybe 500-600 seaters, and this time we sold out the Palladium. So he's really still pulling them in now, and we're just about to go back to America. He's not really toured America for 40 odd years. We've got visas and hopefully going to be doing some stuff next year. It's brilliant. It's the dream gig. You're working with a credible artist who's still writing original material, and you're getting to put your stamp on it. So it's what I always wanted, really.
And if you had an option between a clicked gig and an all live, I'm guessing it's going to be the all live every time.
Every time. There was a point. I did Tony Christie's gig for about 13 years, and there was a point about 7 years in where they introduced click to that to put some BVs on and some extra stuff. And as much as I'm super comfortable playing with a click, I've had to do it many times. It does change the way the gig goes, and everyone recognised it. With that gig, it was only me that had the click, so I played to the click, and everyone else played to me. And they said it felt different. It changed the vibe of the gig, which is interesting. I know a lot of shows now in the West End. I've done 20 years of that really in the past. They started programming clicks that would creep up in the choruses and dip down, and and to give it that natural feel, which is good. I guess it feels better when you're listening out front, but that it is harder to play like that. You just settle in on a pocket, and even if it's like a couple of BPM or even 0.5 of a BPM, you notice it. You do feel it.
Yeah, the click thing is an interesting one. Obviously, a lot of people hate it. A lot of people, just say it doesn't belong in music. But budget restraints and stuff these days, you can't afford to have an orchestra and 5 backing vocals. It's just part of, and I think it should be, and probably is more part of drum education these days. Playing with a click, it should be.
Well, I think it definitely. I would say the first 10 years of being a fully fledged professional, I wasn't playing with click because I was playing with Andy Pryor, big band stuff. You're not doing it with that. But I was doing the odd bit of studio stuff, and it's really weird. I never had the click fear, because I guess because I didn't have anyone instilling that fear into me. It was just like, oh, you want me to play to this? Okay, I'll play with that. And I always saw it as an aid. It was like, oh, great, I don't have to worry. I can sit on top of this and it'll be fine. But I think, it is a budget thing. It's a necessary evil, and I think what it certainly did for me. I have to admit, and I say this a lot. I'm a dreadfully lazy practicer. I'm like, I've always played drums for fun, and practice to me is work, and so I had to find a way of practicing that didn't make me hate the instrument. Do you know what I mean?
I totally get you.
So some people are brilliant at saying, right, I'm setting aside 5 hours today. I'm going to do 5 hours of practice, and they love the process. For me, I'd want to kill myself because I'd get frustrated. I'm a bit of a child. I still have tantrums when things don't go my way. So if I'm not sounding how I want to sound, I'm like, fuck this, I'm going to go and watch Netflix or something. So for me, practice I've found a way of doing a little and often, like 15 minutes, 20 minutes, 4 or 5 times a day rather than blocks, so just to give myself time to get really annoyed and then I go and do something else. But actually being organised enough to set up a metronome and practice to a metronome. Certainly when I was younger, I wasn't doing that a lot. My kind of practice for time was playing along to records and CDs and stuff like that, which of course not every CD that I was listening to was recorded to a click. So you had to move with the band, which is again a great a great experience and something that's a valuable lesson. But playing more stuff that I started playing with click tracks on gigs, whether it was shows or sessions, it really improved my time. It really, without realizing it, I'm practicing keeping solid time. And then a little thing that I developed, because obviously when you play in a big band, the idea is it's not meant to be metronomic. It's not that kind of music. It breathes. It's got to breathe. And so I remember a student asking me once, well, how do you know when to go with the band and go with the flow or rein it in? And I said, well, it's kind of an instinctive thing. But they said, well, how do you practice doing that? How do you practice? Because I used to find that if a band as a collective group, if it's a big band, start to push and I was on a click, if I was doing it in a recording studio, I would gravitate with the band, and then suddenly I was out with the click, because you go with the music. You don't go with the metronomic kind of robot. You go, oh, the music's going here, and then suddenly you sort of have a back in the room moment, and you're not with the click anymore. And what I used to do to practice that is I would set up. Fortunately, I've got a lovely setup here, so I would put I'd mix a click track into Logic, put like a big band album, find a vague tempo, and I would try and play to the click and ignore the big band.
Oh God!
Do you know what I mean? Just so that I wasn't being swayed one way or the other. And then I'd do the opposite. I would play to the big band and ignore the click, and just so that you get used to trusting your time. And that was a really interesting way of getting that together.
Wow. I mean, I like when I know there's a click on the gig. It's one thing I don't have to think about. I don't have to worry about my timing. It's just like, okay, well, I'll just read instead, and that's fine. I can concentrate on that. But the problem is, and I don't know if you've ever found this, you probably haven't, but if I've done 20 gigs to click and all of a sudden it's a live gig, I'm like, oh my God, what's my timing like? I don't know.
Yeah. I know a few people that suffer from that.
Yeah.
It's a bit like getting your sea legs when you've been on a boat for a while, and then you're just like, shit, I've forgotten how to walk on dry land here. It's funny, but I think that's psychological. I do feel that, but I've learnt. No, hang on. I know that my time's okay. It's like it might feel like it's not at the moment because I've not got that safety net of the click being there, but I don't know if you've ever had the thing where you play a gig and you think, oh, my time was all over the place. It didn't feel great. I wasn't on my A game. And then you listen back to it and it's like, wow, that sounds incredible. We have that internal monologue going on all the time telling us we're not good enough, and don't know where that comes from. It's madness to me, but I have it all the time. But I've learned now at the age I am that, I still get... I talked about this on another podcast I did earlier this year, but the imposter syndrome, I still get that.
Really?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. If I get a call to go and do something, like I've got a thing coming up in January for a film soundtrack gig, going over to Air in London, Air Studios, and they're big gigs, those, and that it's going to be like you're on a clock. You've got to get the part done.
Time is money.
Yeah, exactly. And I always sort of think, God, is this the one where I'm going to get found out? Is this the one? And you always come away, and that's gradually, disappearing. I certainly was bad when I was in my 30s, definitely, where, I didn't trust the decisions I was making or whether I was even qualified to make those decisions. But now I'm a little bit more, no, it's cool. I've stopped sort of striving to be this perfect specimen of like time and feel and chops and all that. It's like, you've got to be realistic. And for the most part, the music that I play, I don't need to have Vinny's, amazing abilities. I'd love them, but I'd need to practice 20 hours a day for the rest of time to get anywhere near that. But what I bring to the table, I kind of trust, I know that it's going to be okay for most people,
Absolutely. And, at the end of the day, they're booking you for you. They want you to do your thing, not Vinny's thing. So, I used to think about that, and hey, I'm not comparing what I do to what you do. But in my mind, I'm good enough for the gigs I get asked to do. I know I can get through them, and I'm a bit lazy in the practicing regime as well. I do a bit on a pad. I never play on a kit at home ever. But that's just me, you know.
Sure.
Yeah.
I think the busier I got as well, the time that I'm at home. I mean, it's mad because I've got this wonderful room here. I've got this kit that I'm sat at here. Over there, I've got one of Louis Belson's old kits.
Oh,
with the 224s, you know.
Oh, wow. Amazing.
Yeah, it's incredible. And, you know, when I was 18, I would have never been out of here. You know, all I was doing was, when I wasn't at school, was playing on the drums. But as I say, I wasn't practicing. I was just playing to records, which is a kind of practice. You know, that was what I was doing. It was something that I love. But now, with being so busy, I think, you know, when I do get the odd day off, the last thing I want to do is play drums. I want to do something different. I want to unwind, and unless I've got something to do in here, you know, I teach from here, I do sessions from in here, but to actually sort of sit down, especially like when I've had a busy time like I have in the last sort of month and a half, you know, I want a bit of a break from it. But when I got in here at 9 o'clock and I was supposed to be checking that Zoom was working to do this, as soon as I sat down at the drums, I'm like, oh, what's that? I'm going to try that. Oh, that's a nice groove. I might, yeah. And then suddenly it's like, shit, I haven't even checked Zoom yet, and it's got 10 minutes to go. You know.
That's all right. I hadn't found me any ear monitors. Don't worry.
but I, you know, that's the same when I get to a sound check or whatever. I have to be very careful that once my kit's set up, and if, let's say, I'm set by 4 o'clock, but the sound check's not till 5, I could easily sit behind that kit and play and work stuff out until 5 o'clock, but you end up pissing up the lighting director and
yes.
I have to, when it's not my turn to sound check, I have to sit away from the drums, because if I'm sat at kit, I have to play.
Yeah, I know, and I think it's a pet hate of many band members that, you know, yeah, and the guitarists are as bad. Let's be honest.
Yeah,
they're all as bad.
Yeah. So it's an affliction.
yeah, it is. It really is. But I have to ask, because I know you said you taught yourself to read later on. Do you regret not learning to read earlier on? Would it have made life easy for you?
Yeah, I think it would have given me more confidence in that. Yeah. I mean, the thing about it is looking at that, and that's said from looking back now, knowing what I know now. So when I was 18, and I was in my final year at school, I was playing in the school jazz band, I was playing in the school big band, I was doing some pub gigs and some weddings with some bands outside of school. Because I didn't, even at that time at 18, I didn't know that music was a career. I didn't know that was a thing that was open to me. You know, it was like, this is my hobby. I'm getting paid a bit of extra pocket money for it. You know, I was doing a bit of teaching as well. You know, the school asked me to teach some younger students at the school, because I was going to be leaving the school and there was no one taking over on drums in the bands at school. Right. So in my lunch times, when I was in sixth form, I was teaching one-to-one drums in the. So I was making like ridiculous money for an 18-year-old. You know, I was gigging, I was teaching, I was working part-time at a supermarket. It was like, okay, you know, I had a car, you know, I was driving around. It was like happy days, but it wasn't ever, oh, this is my living, and this, I've got to seriously work at this so that I can become a successful professional in the industry. That was never on my radar. It was only when I got to college, and the reason I chose Salford, because I didn't know what I wanted to do for a living. I wasn't ever into academia. I kind of flunked my A-levels, but I flunked my A-levels. A-levels? What am I talking about? I flunked my A-levels because I auditioned for Salford University on a course called, it was a BA Honours in Band Musicianship. And it was basically, I discovered it by accident. I was looking at Salford University for physiotherapy courses because I was playing football at the time. I was playing for my school and I was playing for my local town, and I remember getting injured and having some physio, and was fascinated by how the physio worked out what the injury was and how to fix it. So I was like, well, okay, that was quite interesting. I'll look at doing that. And Salford University sent this syllabus through that had all the courses that they offered, and I noticed this thing called band musicianship. So I wrote to them. I said, what's this? And they said, oh, well, it's a performance-based course rather than academia. So you're not going to be writing essays about dead composers. You're going to be playing. You're going to be composing, arranging, and performing in a specific genre. And the choice of genres was wind band, brass band, or big band. And I'm like, I'm doing that. you know. And again, it wasn't like I'll go to Salford, I'll learn my trade and I'll come out being a professional drummer. At that point, it was just like, well, if I'm going to get any kind of a degree, it's only going to be in something I enjoy, because I'm definitely not going to work at academia because I don't find it interesting. You know, I just wasn't for me. And so going there in my first year, it's like, right, the first thing I want to do is I want to play in the college big band, because that's why I'm here. But of course I didn't get it because I couldn't read. So then the reason I taught myself to read and got that together was not because I want to be a professional and I want to take this further in my career. It was, I want to play in the college big band. That's what I want to do. That's what I love. So I'm going to learn to read. And I didn't know about bands like Nijo in London. I didn't know anything. And then it was around, or just a few years earlier than that, I discovered Mike Smith playing with the BBC big band.
Oh yes.
And Mike's the best that this country's produced, in my opinion. I don't think there's anyone to top that guy. He can sight read anything, and make it sound like he's been rehearsing it for years.
I love both Mike and Ralph, I have to say, both phenomenal.
Yeah. Well, you know that when Mike got the radio band gig when he was 20, he auditioned, and the last two it came down to was Ralph and Mike.
Oh, I didn't know that. Wow, that's interesting.
And Mike got it, and then Ralph went on to go and play with Van Morrison and did everything else that he did. So it's like
phenomenal players both.
Oh, outstanding! And for me, Ralph, Mike, Ian, Thomas, and Neil Wilkinson they're the pinnacle for me in this country.
Yeah.
So I started going in. So what I did was I started going and sitting behind Mike. Originally Maida Vale in London, but then, fortunately for me, the BBC moved the band to Pebble Mill in Birmingham, which isn't there anymore. But Birmingham was only sort of an hour and a half's drive from Manchester to get there, and they used to record every Monday morning, or every day, Monday all day. So I didn't have any lectures on a Monday, so I took my battered old Ford Escort, and I was getting out of bed at 6 o'clock every morning, driving to Birmingham, helping Mike set up his drums, and sitting behind him doing a day's sight reading. And that's how, that, along with a few other bits and bobs, that's how I taught myself to read. But I think had I started reading from day one, like when I was 13, I would have had more confidence in that, and it might have made me opened up a few doors to some things that were going on elsewhere, like Nijo. I remember when I first joined Andy Pryor's band, the lead trombone player in the band was a guy called Andy Wood, who's one of the best lead trombone players in the world, best trombone players in the world. I mean, I was working with him Saturday night. He's phenomenal. Yeah. Any film soundtrack in the last 15 years, he'll have been on it. He's
the Derek Watkins of trombone, then.
Yeah, exactly that. Yeah. And he was doing Nijo at the time, and he said, "Oh, Bill Ashton's asked if you want to come down," And I, at the time, living in Manchester and doing Andy Pryor's gig, I was kind of too busy to do it, and that was my kind of excuse. But a massive part of me didn't want to do it because I felt I'd get my arse handed to me, because, well, it's London and the best players in the country work and live in London. So I'm just going to turn up, I'm going to flail around all over the place and get laughed out of the room. So I didn't want to put myself through that thing. Because at that time, like I say, I was only 20, 21. So I'd only really been reading, or I'd only sort of just started to sight read properly. And I certainly wasn't confident with it. And even now, I'm good at it. I won't lie. But it doesn't come natural to me. It's not. Whereas I look at Mike do it, Mike Smith, and I think it's like breathing for him. I don't think there's nothing you can put in front of him that would flummox him. And whereas there are things you can put in front of me, and I'll go, I'm going to need a bit of time to have a look at that.
Well, do you know, especially, I mean, let's be honest, big band stuff is not the easiest, with dotted rhythms and tied notes. Reading those brass phrasings, it's bloody hard. It's not. Compared to playing pop and rock stuff, which is pretty easy, pretty straightforward, really, isn't it? But that's not easy stuff to sight read.
No, and of course, a lot of it is interpretation as well. It's not specific. Like you go and do a West End show or a film soundtrack, it's pretty much notated what they want you to do. And I sometimes struggle a bit more with that, where it's like I've got a specific hi-hat part. Sometimes, like in shows like Hamilton and Dear Evan Hansen, they'll write exactly what ghost notes they want, what open hi-hat and close hi-hats they want, which cymbals to crash on like that. I start going dizzy when I see all that on the page.
That detail with which cymbal.
Yeah. It's crazy. Like in Dear Evan Hansen, there's a section in one of the big tunes there where it says play all the, like all the crashes on the beat are on left-sided crash, on the right. On the offbeat, it's on the ozone. It's like it's a specific, like the Sabian ozone. It's madness, So the kit, is built with Dear Evan Hansen in mind.
Wow.
It's that specific, that's hard to. I challenge anyone to sight read that. That would be tough. But with big band, it's you're just getting the phrasings. There's no orchestration there. It's like, and also. Do you want to play this, or you don't have to play this? But
the phrasings, you've still got to read them, though, because it's obvious if you get it wrong.
Of course, it stands out like a sore thumb. It's happened many times. And when I'm teaching, a lot of students do come to me to learn how to, they want to improve their reading, and that's the one thing that they struggle with the most is like, well, I've got these phrasings here. How do I orchestrate them around the kit? And for me, I just listen. It comes back to me, all the listening I did from the age of 11 or 12, it's soaked in, it's like you can see a phrase. I can see a phrase now on the page, and I kind of know what the trumpets are going to be playing. So I know, whether to make it a short hit, a long hit, phrase it around the toms, leave it out. The instinct gets better. So I always say to students, look, if you don't listen to this kind of music and immerse yourself in it, you're never going to play it authentically. And that's the same with anything. You can't. It'd be like trying to learn French, but never speaking to a French person or never going and visiting France. You wouldn't be able to do it.
No. Oh, amazing stuff. Well, look, you touched on the West End there. Like you've done more than your fair share down there, and that's something many of us never get to do. I mean, I've done plenty of shows and different things around and about, but West End is a different thing altogether. Let's talk about your first experience of the West End, because I'm sure it was nerve-wracking, fun, terrifying.
Yeah, all of that. So I kind of fell into shows doing Andy Pryor's gig. People were coming in and out of that band. Not just, I mean, it was very much a Northwest-based band, but a lot of Deps were coming in from London, guys who I knew of, people like Simon Gardner and, people I'd been listening to for years. Simon Gardner's probably one of the best lead trumpet players in the country, if not the world. Those guys were coming in, and a lot of those guys were sort of seeing and hearing me play, realising I could read, and started recommending me for a couple of bits and bobs show-wise. Not initially West End, but the first kind of pro musical theatre gig I did was a show called Anything Goes, which is a Gershwin show.
Sorry. Yeah, Gershwin, not Cole Porter.
Cole Porter, yes.
Oh, it is Cole Porter, yeah.
Yeah, it is. You're right. I'm all over the shop. I did that, but that was it was keyboard MD, and it was very much the MD would count the tune off on the mic, and then we'd all play. And he would nod the rals. It wasn't somebody stood there conducting. And I loved that. I did that for about 6 months. And then around at this similar time, I'd started, I'd said I was going to sit behind Mike Smith. I'd got to know Mike Smith really, really well. And he then said, do you fancy coming and depping for me on Witches of Eastwick in the West End? And this was in the year 2000, this was. So I would have been 25. And I was still living up north at that point. And I'd already done a couple of deps that year for Mike with Shirley Bassey, which was mind-blowing.
Oh, I bet.
That was a real taste of, this is really proper now. This is big-time stuff. It was terrifying. But Mike said, look, I've got this show that I'm doing. I knew he was doing it, and I'd already been to see him play it because I was taking every opportunity to watch Mike Smith play that I could. So I'd already sat in with him and watched him play the show. And then a few months later, he got in touch and he said, look, I've got 3 or 4 deps that cover me on this, but none of them are available on this Friday and Saturday, like 2 shows on the Saturday, 1 show on the Friday, that, in a few weeks' time. I think it was about 4 weeks.
Sure.
I said, okay, I'll come and have a look at it properly. Can you get me a copy of the pad? And I went down to London and I sat in with him and I'm watching the pad and it's all conducted. There's a bit of stuff on click in the middle, like one track, which was like a big 7-minute track. In the middle of this thing, the click would come in and then it would drop out again, then it would come in again. And the kit he was playing was like full acoustic kit. Then there was an octopad with, you had to patch change different sounds, which I'd never done before.
Oh, God.
There were 3, what do you call them, rototoms. There were 3 rototoms. There were 2 cowbells, 4 wood blocks, 2 triangles, ratchet, a load of hand percussion like shakers, PRT cymbals, the crashy cymbals, all that. And I mean, he made it look like he was, walking down the street. It was just beautiful watching him play it. But I'm like, first of all, I've never played to a professional conductor before. Second of all, I've never played so much stuff. It was like flying an aircraft. So I said, well, look, give me a week to start prepping this. And at the time, I was in the middle of the tour with Anything Goes, so I was away, So he gave me a drum heavy mix. He gave me the pad, and he took some pictures of the setup as well, so that I could practice the choreography of getting from one instrument to the other. And I did about a week or so's work on it, and I was flailing around like an idiot. I was like, this is not gonna go well. So I rang him up. I said, look, mate, can you try and find somebody else? I said, I really want to help you out. I said, but I don't think I'm gonna do a good job, and that will reflect badly on you. And it might be my one chance to, if you get it. I'm not saying if you get a bad reputation, like if you do a bad gig, you never get called again. But in my eyes, that was how it was going to go. So he said, well, thanks for being honest. I'll go away and see if I can find somebody else. And then about a week later, he came back and said, look, no one's available. Please do this. I'm like, oh, please go away, Mike. And so I said, okay, maybe this is meant to be. Maybe I'm supposed to be doing this. So what I did was I depped out 2 weeks worth of Anything Goes. So I was losing money on it. And I just went
big
home.
time.
Yeah, I went home and I was doing, it's the one time in my life I was probably doing about 8 or 9 hours a day. But what I did do was I went down to London. I mean, they do this as standard now, but everyone was laughing at me at the time. So I went and sat in with him again, and I took a massive camcorder with me, and I just filmed the MD. And then I went home and I put it on a TV. I put it onto video cassette, VHS, and I had a little TV and video cassette player all built in one, and I set that up near my drums, and I just practiced playing to the MD, watching the MD stick. So I got used to that. And I didn't have half the instruments that were needed to play that show. So I had bits of cardboard doubling as wood blocks, so that I knew that was the wood block pattern I was playing, just for the choreography. And I think I went down. I stayed at Mike's house about 2 days before. I think I went down because I said, right, well, what I'll do is on the Wednesday and the Thursday, I'll sit in with you again. And then I was doing the show for the first time on the Friday. So I stayed at Mike's, and then while I was down there, I could go into the pit early and practice playing his drums. Because when you dep for somebody, you're not allowed to start adjusting heights and angles of stuff because it's all been set and the microphones are all in position. It's not going anywhere. So you have to learn not only to play a show you're not familiar with, but also somebody else's gear and their setup. So I was going into the theatre at sort of like 2-3 o'clock in the afternoon, a couple of days before, and doing 3 or 4 hours practice in there with, on the kit, getting used to where everything was. And then did the first one on the Friday night, and I didn't sleep the night before at all. It's the most I've ever been scared about anything. And I had to have a kind of little word with myself when I got into the pit. I'm like, hang on, I'm doing what I love here. This is the drums. I'm not going to be scared of the drums. I'm just going to play the drums. And, I knew that any mistake I made now, and there would be mistakes, there were so many corners in that show, but I thought any mistake I make now is just going to be because I'm a human being, not because I'm underprepared, not because I don't give a shit about the gig. So it's like, okay, well, let's just go with that. And then there were mistakes, nothing that meant the rails came up, missing a ratchet turn or missing a triangle hit, something which you make a big deal of at the time, and then you realise nobody cares, nobody even saw that.
It's that, isn't it? That's
yeah.
it.
and I think I knew the music so well. I wasn't really reading it. I had the parts out, but a lot of it was internalized. And everyone was super nice afterwards, you know. And the pressure then as well was I was this kid from Manchester that nobody knew. And in that pit, there was Derek Watkins, there was Dave Olney, who was on bass? No, Andy Pask on bass, I think, possibly.
Oh, God, right, okay.
It was like all these guys that I was like, oh God, and they're all lovely, but they're all kind of going, who's this? What, you know? So you're under the microscope in a way. It's like it's make or break, sink or swim. So, and I came away and I was like, it was an amazing feeling coming out of a stage door in the West End for the first time. I really remember it. So it was a Friday night in the West End, and I'm coming out of the stage door, and it was like, oh, I like this.
10 feet tall. Yeah,
exactly. And the fixer was a guy called Maurice Cambridge, who still fixes a lot of stuff in town now. He rang me up after the weekend, and he said, you know, everyone was so knocked out with the job you did. He said, I've moved you to the top of the dep list. So I'm like, oh, wow, okay. So I kind of got the first call whenever Mike wasn't available after that, you know, and it was brilliant. And then from there, people in those days, I don't know if it still works like that now. It's been so long since I've sort of dipped into the West End. But in those days, I was like a bit like gold dust. And I say this to all my young students now who want to get into that. Do a good job. And you're like, if you're you know, if you've got a good work ethic and you do your homework and you do your job, you'll get lots of work, because people are looking for deps who are really, really good, but also available. There's a reason people like Ralph and Ian and Mike don't get calls to do deps, is because they're never available. So you want somebody you can call in the afternoon and say, look, I don't feel like doing the show tonight. Can you go and cover it for me? Yeah, of course I can. And that's what I was doing when I was coming down doing Witches of Eastwick. I started doing Kiss Me Kate for Alan Cox at the Victoria Palace. Mike then moved on to South Pacific, I think, at the National. I was doing that for him. I was doing Anything Goes for Alan Cox at the National when that went there. Then Andy McGlasson got in touch, and I was doing the Full Monty for him. And then I moved down to London, and I was probably depping at one point on about 7 or 8 shows, and I was making a living doing that. I was out every night of the week doing a different show. But the pressure was always there. It's that first one, there's no feeling like it, because it's the most lonely feeling in the world, because everyone else in that pit has been doing it 8 times a week for however many years, and you're doing it for the first time with no sound check, no rehearsal.
Oh.
It's horrible. You know, you're going through it.
Can you imagine, right, any other musician, for example, that, you know, trumpet player, right? I mean, this is simplified. You know, you can go in, the trumpet's there on the stand, you can only take your mouthpiece. You know, it wouldn't happen, would it? And, you know, and a trumpet is a trumpet. Your valves are there. You don't have to look around and pick things. You have to pick a mute up or something, but that's it. It's a different beast, isn't it? You know, your drum kit is home for you, isn't it? You have stuff as you like. Everything's in the right place. To go in on, I hate playing on somebody else's kit when I can't adjust anything.
Yeah,
snare height is always a big thing for me, because I like it a little lower than higher up.
Yeah, that's one of the big challenges, is especially at that time when I was doing, like I say, 7 or 8 different shows. That's 7 or 8 different kit setups.
Oh.
It's like you don't settle ever. But I remember talking to Mike about it, and him saying, you know, I still get like that on my first one. And actually, Mike came after I finished Anything Goes. I did a tour, like a musical review tour with a guy called Wayne Sleep, who's yeah. And it was him and a girl called Melanie Stace, who's a singer. And Mike came and depped for me on that. And I remember him coming and sitting in and saying, "Oh, you know, he was nervous." And I'm like, "You're Mike Smith. You shouldn't be nervous." But he's like, the nerves come about. They want to do a good job. And I think at the time, you know, Mike is Mike Smith. So there's a different kind of pressure there. There's a pressure when you're young and new, because everyone's kind of listening to you going, well, who's this? Are they any good? But there's a different type of pressure when you're somebody like Mike Smith, where it's like, well, it's expected that it's going to be good. And if it's not, what's happened to Mike Smith?
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, so the more sort of well known you get and the more established you are, that there's a different set of pressures come along.
And you know what? So much more pressure again working with a conductor, because not only are you're looking at parts, trying to pick instruments up, you've got to have an eye on what he's doing or she's doing as well, and that's a different ball game altogether, isn't it?
Really tough. And submitting your I know it's very cliche, but submitting your ego at the door, you're not in charge of the time anymore. They are. So you could be playing a groove piece. You know, Witches of Eastwick had a lot of pocket stuff in it, but if the conductor can see that the cast, maybe they've been out on the lash the night before and they're struggling with the dance routine, you might need to slow it down a bit. And there's no point you with your eyes down not looking at the conductor. If he's trying to slow things down a bit and you're ploughing on, keeping good time, you'll get the never again. They'll just say, well, he doesn't watch, so we can't have him, you know. And that was a big learning curve for me as well, you know. I never fell foul to it, thank God, but I always say to people, eyeball the conductor wherever you can. Every time they're looking at you, make sure you're looking back. Conductors love the attention.
Yeah.
And it's an ego thing, but it's also that it makes their job easier. If they've got the drummer's attention, they can take the whole orchestra wherever they want.
Do you know what? I'm going to bore you with one of my favourite stories. This and about, I don't know, it's probably 10 years ago, Tony Bennett headlined the Royal Variety, right? And he had his quartet with him. And I can't remember the piece. Was it Why Do You Keep the Music Playing or something like that? I can't remember.
How do you keep the music playing? Yeah.
Oh, how do you, yes, yeah, beautiful song.
Amazing.
And I remember the orchestra in the pit started off, and it was obviously a bit on the slow side for Tony. I mean, you know, he was an elderly man then, for his breath and everything.
Yeah.
And there was this beautiful moment where the conductor of the orchestra just locked eyes with his piano player, his MD, and it was the most discreet thing so as not to pull his pants down in front of, you know, a national TV audience. And the trio were just about to sink in with him. And he did this little gesture, and blinking, you'd miss it, but he just sort of went, can you take the tempo up a little bit? And it was magic. The tempo lifted, the quartet sank in, and it's one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen on TV. I was just like, oh. And I said to my wife, did you see that? And she went, what? I was like, forget it. Forget it. It was honestly, Elliot, it was magical. It was just like, oh.
That's it. That's the real thing. That's a little glimpse behind the curtain, isn't it?
Total respect between these two pros. You know, it's just like, oh yes.
And that's why people like Tony and Sinatra for a long time, they only ever toured with their MD and drummer, and then they'd use a pickup orchestra wherever they went. Bassie was the same. When I depped for Shirley Bassey for Mike, it was me and the MD that went over to Monte Carlo.
Right.
And we used to pick up French orchestra who were amazing, you know. But if you've got the MD and the drummer who've got a great relationship, plus the artist has got a great relationship with the MD, then you'll win. It's
going to fall into place, isn't it? Yeah.
It is. A funny story about, you know, there's a lot we can learn in the practice room, but there's so many things that you just learn on the job, and you have to make a decision there and then, and you can't prepare for it. When I first moved to London, 2002, I got a gig off a guy called Vic Ash. Vic Ash was the lead tenor player with the BBC Big Band, so he knew who I was, because I was like a BBC Big Band super fan, always hanging around Mike Smith. And I'd moved to London, and there'd been an album made. A songwriter had written a load of songs and recorded it, had got a big budget and gone to Abbey Road and got different singers to perform each of the songs that he'd written, and they were all in different genres. And he wanted to do an album launch at a place that's not there anymore. It's called Pizza on the Park. It was in Hyde Park, and it was a lovely little basement jazz club. And Vic Ash had been asked to put the band together. And on the album, it was Ralph Salmons, but Ralph Salmons couldn't make the album launch, so somehow it landed on my doorstep. So I went along, and again, it was Steve Pearce on bass. It was really, really beautiful team of guys. And again, I'm this 27. nobody's heard of me. I'm like rocking in place of Ralph, and everyone's going, who's this, you know? And we had a rehearsal in the afternoon, and in the rehearsal, one of the singers was singing one of these songs, and there was an MD there who was MDing the whole show. And he counted it off, and we're playing along, and the artist stopped the MD halfway through the song and said, it's a bit too slow, this. We need this a bit more up-tempo. So I had my metronome with me, so I clocked that we were at 100, and the artist wanted it at about 115. Yeah. So I'm making a note of that. But the MD's like, okay. The MD says to me, so that's going to be faster tonight. I'm like, yep, brilliant. So we carried on with the rehearsal. When it came to the gig, the MD counted it off at 100 again.
Oh, God.
And what the artist did, what all artists do, is when there's a problem with the time, they look at the drummer. They don't automatically look at the MD. So I'm like, well, I'm this nobody, 27 years old. I'm not going to undermine the conductor. He's counted it off there, but the artist is glaring at me to speed it up. What the hell do I do? You know, so I think from recollection, I did speed it up. And what I did was I kept smiling. I was eyeballing the MD, sort of smiling, nodding my head, going, yeah, this is sounding great. And it was almost like he kind of looked over because he felt it was speeding up, but then he was like, oh, it mustn't be speeding up because the drummer's watching.
It's subliminal.
Yeah, it's like a Darren Brown mind control thing. You know? But that kind of thing you can't learn in the classroom. You know, you can't. That's just like you make a decision on the moment. You know, how do you legislate for that? It's really tough. But you know, I think all those kind of stories you can. I certainly tell that story a lot when I'm teaching, and it's like these are the things that you will encounter, and there'll be a million other things that you encounter on the gig that you just have to deal with, and remember that you know we talk about mistakes and things that go wrong and all that. We build them up in our heads, and we make them out to be this crazy thing that's ruining our careers and ruining our lives. They're not. They're just human error. You know, I always say to my students, I'm always really into mistakes. They're not nice sometimes. You feel like a bit of an idiot, but the way we learn is by making mistakes. So embrace a mistake. I laugh at mistake. When anyone else on the stage makes a mistake, I'm roaring with laughter, you know. And I expect the same back because I know that everyone I'm working with has made an honest mistake. If a mistake is made because you're drunk or you're high or you've not done any prep or you don't care about the gig, well then forget it. I'm not interested. But if you have done your homework and you care about the music and a mistake happens, then there you go. You're guaranteed that mistake will never happen in that place again.
Of course. But you know, going back to your gig where you had to take the tempo up, I found myself in a position before now. I ended up with a band, and we were backing some artists. And do you remember Lee Mead?
Yeah.
Well, Lee ended up on the gig, and we thought he was using backing tracks. We didn't think he was. So we were off to go for a pint, and he said, "Well, who's playing for me?" And it was like, we didn't realise we were. So we dished these parts out now because everything else was to click. The MD was on my right-hand side, which is never going to work if you're if you're a right-handed drummer. You stand his ear, isn't it? So you're
put themselves there. They always do that.
So I was like, well, okay, and there was no click involved. And I said, I don't really know any. I hadn't done any prep because I didn't know we were playing for him, you know. And it was like stuff from Wicked. It was stuff from Joseph. It was some interesting stuff, some tempo changes. And so the MD is kind of like, do you remember Stretch? You know, Stretch was on that gig as well.
Yeah, I love Stretch.
So it was a good band. But I said, look, Lee, I said, I don't really know. I said, you know, MD will count it off. I said, but as far as the tempo changes go, I don't know. I'm not familiar with any of these tunes. I said, but by all means, I said, if they're a million miles out, I said, come and stamp your foot right in front of my bass drum and I'll go with you. And he went, oh, no, I couldn't. And I said, please do. I said, honestly, if you want it somewhere close, that's the way it's going to have to be. And he went, oh, I feel rude. And I was like, no, do it. And it was great. It worked a treat. There was only a couple of occasions where things were perhaps a bit too slow. But you have to adapt, don't you? It's as simple as that. Yeah,
you've always got to have one eye on the MD, one eye on the artist. It's as simple as that. And if I want to double check that I'm in the right place, I'll watch an artist. If I can see their feet, a good artist will tap his foot where he wants it. subliminally. They won't be doing it for you. They'll just be tapping where they're feeling it. I was doing a thing with Misha Paris last week, and she's very tempo specific, and she's used to having her band behind her. But when she's we were doing a thing with the Len Phillips Orchestra, and she when she sings, she moves where she feels it. And I just like, right, whatever it gets counted in at by the MD, I will put it where she's feeling it, and there are no issues. But again, you can't practice that. You can't unless you've got the budget to hire a band, hire an artist, hire an MD, and say, right, what I want you to do here is I want the MD to count this off a bit too fast. I want the artist to move slightly slower, and then I can practice being locked in with the artist. It's not going to happen, is it?
Yeah, no one's living in that world. It's fascinating. I mean, I speak to loads of drummers, as you know, you've seen, but to have somebody what you do is quite different. You're in a slightly different world to a lot of the drummers. I mean, a lot of them do the similar sort of thing, but working with MDs, reading clicks, having to, just as you say, go with an artist rather than an MD, and it's invaluable stuff to hear about. It really is, and it's not. Oh, are we still there?
Yeah, still here, mate.
Oh, hang on a minute. What's that then? Where's that gone? Hang on 1 second. Maybe it disappeared. Oh, there we go. That was weird. It just disappeared. I'll fix that anyway. It's just invaluable to hear this stuff, and it's. I don't know. I just find it really interesting because it's similar. I've done a lot of stuff over the years. Again, I'm not comparing what I do to you do, but I've done a lot of similar kind of gigs and different things, and it's just interesting. It really is.
It is. It's I like the challenge of it. There are times when when I get to do things where it's all just you're just playing drums and you're backing an artist and it's all. Leo's gig is slightly, is different to that world. There's no click, there's no MD. Well, I'm kind of technically the MD, but that means nothing in the pop world. I'm the go-between management and Leo, and it's the same when I do Tony Hadley's gig. He lets me count them off and we rehearse and we play, but I think what I try and instill with the students that I teach is, and I'm in the process of writing a book about it, about how to survive as a freelance player, not just saying, well, I'm a rock drummer, I'm a pop drummer, I'm a jazz drummer, I'm a big band drummer. You've got to wear many hats, and I think if you can do all those things, then I know a few drummers who, when they're not doing their massive gigs, they're not really doing anything, whereas between Leo Sayer and Tony Hadley tours, I want to be working. Yeah. So, and that was never like driven by financial reasons. It was never like, no, I do find it interesting. I find it fascinating. And I like to have said, yeah, I can do that. So if I'm called to go and play with the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra in a rhythm section, backing a 60-piece orchestra with a conductor at the front, I want to say, yeah, I can do that. I'm available. I don't want to be, well, that's not my thing. In the same way that if somebody says, can you come and play background jazz in a Park Lane hotel on a Tuesday night and it's all brushes? Well, yeah, of course I can. Whereas a lot of students, sometimes I teach a little bit at ICMP in London and BIM in London as well. They'll come in and they've got their thing, in the same way that when I was 18, my thing was big band. You when you're that age, you've got your passion. As soon as I bring out the brushes, they're all like, oh, I don't even own a pair. It's like, why not? What would you rather do between pop gigs or rock gigs? Deliver pizzas or play your drums?
Yeah, no brainer.
I'd rather play the drums. Do you know what I mean? So even if it's not a style of music you like, playing jazz standards, to go out and make 250 quid on a Tuesday night, why would you not want to do that by playing the drums?
You wouldn't do that in a week doing the other thing, would you? Let's be honest.
But it's everyone's choice. I'm not saying there's a right or wrong way, but for me, my heroes have always been the guys that can do everything. Your
chameleons, musical chameleon.
Your Vinnies, your Steve Gadds, your Mike Smiths, your Ian Thomases. You see Ian Thomas, he'll be doing a tour with Eric Clapton 1 minute, and he'll be in the house band at Ronnie Scott's the next. It's like, that's great. I love that.
Do you know what? One thing you mentioned before about playing with an orchestra. Now, that is something that would terrify me without a click, because obviously strings are very a little bit behind the beat, shall we say? All wonderful musicians, but how do you cope with that without click and with an orchestra?
I think my big band grounding helped a little bit with that, because in a big band it tends to be the saxes that like to lay back. And when I was younger, again, I used to gravitate towards the music, so I was like, oh, the saxes are laying back, maybe I'm rushing, I'll go with them. And Malcolm Melling, the guy who hired me for Andy Pryor's gig, sort of said, hey, don't be following them. He said, you keep it there where it is. If we all start following them, the whole thing will end up going backwards. So, it's like, okay, so I've just got they need me as a click, really, so that they can lay back on the beat. They're trying to lay back on the beat. They don't want me following them. And when you think that's, it's in a weird way, it's very similar to what happens in neo soul music with D'Angelo, where if Questlove is playing right in the pocket and Pino Palladino's playing slightly back, if Questlove went with Pino, the whole thing would start slowing down at a rate of knots. It's that kind of thing. So that helped when I first started playing with big orchestras. It's like, okay, some people I know, they get around it if it's a studio situation by turning the strings down. They don't want to hear the strings. They just want to hear. I don't like that. I want to feel part of the orchestra. I want to hear everything. So I do want to hear the strings, but I want to be able to play and put it where it should be. So I think you just learn to be aware of what's happening, trust your own time, and also follow the conductor. And there's a way, there's always that thing of, well, classical conductors they're a little bit more flowery than.
Oh, yeah.
So,
more on the upbeat as well, can't it? Sometimes.
Exactly. Yeah. And you've got to learn that way of playing. But one of the big things that I did, which sounds obvious, but so many people don't do it, is I'd go and have a coffee with the string players, and I'm like, okay, when you're playing with the rhythm section, are you watching the conductor and phrasing it where you want, or are you listening to what are you doing? They say, no, we just follow the rhythm section. When the rhythm section are playing, we're not even looking at the conductor. I'm like, oh, that's good. So I know that where I put it, they will, even if they want to lay back on it, they're listening to me. And even to the point where if there's a big downbeat hit, you just said there, a straight conductor, it's on the up. But I've done sessions where I've put it where I think it should be, and I'm like, oh, everyone's together there, and I'll look, and all the string players are watching me, not the conductor, so they're trying to come in with me. But the reason for that, I don't know if you know this, but I asked the question, I said, why is it that it happens just after the downbeat? And they're like, well, with a trumpet and with a drum, as soon as
the attack's there, yeah.
Whereas there, it's got to get going before the sound's made, so that the actual fullness of the sound doesn't happen until the bow is halfway up the string, which is when the conductor's arm's up there, and that's why it is.
It's interesting. I've never asked anybody that question before. I thought, well, like you're the man, you've done enough of it, so
yeah. And I only, like I say, it's like, okay, if something's scaring me, if something bothers me, ask the question.
Yeah.
Like, take them for a coffee and talk about. I used to do it with brass players. What do you want in a drummer when you're playing in a big band? What do you want the drummer to do? And they, that was another big part of me simplifying what I did. If you're playing at 250 beats a minute, if you're trying to phrase all that and it's all written out on your part, trumpet players have got nothing to like, and it only needs one little thing for you to be out. And the whole thing sounds like, it's flamming all over the place and it's not tight. And a lot of trumpet players say, whenever we've got busy phrasing like that, just 2 and 4 on the click drum, on the rim click.
Stay out the way.
Stay out the way. Just give us that time feel.
Yeah.
And it's really funny when I play with the Sid Lawrence Orchestra. I've got a gig with them on Saturday. Whenever I do that, whenever I just go, I call it the Irv Cutler beat, 2 and 4 with the rim click, swinging on the ride cymbal. I see so many like trombone players and trumpet players' heads turn around and sort of nodding, going, "Oh, there it is." That's what they want. And I know that I can phrase with them if I want to. But you listen to Irv Cutler, a great tune that absolutely solidifies all of this is a Sinatra tune called "All or Nothing at All."
Oh yeah.
There's a big shout chorus in the middle, and there's some phrasing that the brass play. And if he wanted to, Irv Cutler could play all of those phrases and set them all up and fill around them. He doesn't. He just plays swing on the ride, 2 and 4 on the snare drum, and it's just at the very end of the shout chorus. There's a couple of big hits on beat 2, and he does a little fill into the first one, a little fill into the second one. Those are the only things he sets up and plays the figures, and it's just glorious. It swings like the clappers. And interestingly, I heard a podcast that Pete Erskine, who I know you've chatted to, and you know Pete.
I haven't actually yet.
Oh, have you not?
No, he's on the hit list though. Put it that way.
I thought you'd done one with him.
No.
He said it was a podcast for Jake Reed. Do you know that guy, Jake Reed?
Don't think so.
He's worth checking out. He's just done one with just done an interview with J.R. Robinson as well.
I've had JR's been on, yeah.
Yeah, I know you've had J.R. JR's lovely, isn't he?
He is.
But Pete Erskine talks about a similar thing, being on a session recently with the guy that wrote Family Guy. What's that dude's name?
Oh, is it?
Yeah, MacFarlane, Seth.
Yeah, Seth MacFarlane. Yeah,
Seth MacFarlane, and he's done a few albums with Seth because Seth's a great singer and loves the big band genre. And they did it. Pete was saying they did a take of something, and Pete phrased all the hits with the brass, and everyone was like, "Yeah, that's a great take." That, and they went into the control booth to listen to it, and Pete said, "I'm really sorry, everyone. Can we just do that? Can we do that again? I just want to try something different." And all the brass players were like, "Bloody hell, their lips are hurting and all that." He said, "I'm sorry, guys. Let's just do it one more time." And he said he did the same take, and he phrased none of it with the brass. He just played 2 and 4 or just swung underneath them, and they all went back in and they went, "Yeah, that sounds way better, way better."
Wow, that's a lesson there, isn't it?
Yeah, and the fact that Erskine is still making those decisions and learning that at his age with what he's done. He
still cares enough. Yeah,
he does. Yeah, he was. When I was 16, I went to a master class that he was giving in Manchester at the Bridgewater Hall in one of the function rooms there. And as I say, I was about 16 or 17, so I was, I was wet behind the ears completely, and got into the room. There was maybe about 20 guys there, and they were all like the Manchester. I knew Dave Hassel was there, Steve Gilbert was there, Errol Roberts, all the big names in Manchester jazz and session world when there was a session scene in Manchester. And he did that thing. He did a bit of playing, did a bit of talking, and then he said, "Right, I want to demonstrate a few things. Who wants to come and have a play?" So, of course, everyone's like, "No, not doing that." But me being daft, I'm like, "What, a free lesson off Pete Erskine? Yeah, I'll have a go at that. I'll make a fool of myself. I might learn something." And he got me up and he said, "Right," he said, play me some jazz time." So I, sit down and give him all my best Buddy Rich, Elvin Jones bullshit. And he stops me after about 8 bars. He goes, "Okay, that's nice. You've got some nice stuff together there." He said, "What are you thinking about when you play?" I said, "I'll be honest, Pete, I'm thinking about not screwing up in front of Peter Erskine." And he went, "Right." He said, "Should we try and think about music? Should we do that?" He says, "What I want you to do this time," he said, "I want you to imagine that you're in a jazz club with a quartet, tenor sax, piano, bass and drums." And he said, "Pick a standard." So I said, "All right, Autumn Leaves." He said, "Right, do Autumn Leaves." He said, "I want you to do AABA, and then I want a tenor solo. I want some drum fours, and then the head and out." He said, "Away you go." He said, "You count it off your tempo." And it was amazing because suddenly I wasn't thinking about what chops can I show off to Pete Erskine. It was like, I've got to play Autumn Leaves here. So, I'm playing at this tempo and I'm phrasing the melody with my left hand, as best I could when I was 16. Gets to the tenor solo, I change cymbals over to a different ride. I'm playing rim click on 2 and 4. The drum fours come along. I'm trying to hint at the melody, all those kind of things. And he said that at the end, he said that was a different performance. He said, every time you sit at the drums, whatever it is, somebody's asked you to demonstrate a beat or whatever, just think about the music. Don't think about what a drummer would want to hear you play. What are you playing? Have a reference. And it's like, wow, blew my mind.
That's stuck with you then all this time?
All the time. All the time. If I'm at a gig or a party and there's a kit there, "Oh, you play a bit of drums, go and play something." It's like, right, what am I going to play? I'll play a bit of James Brown, and I'll imagine being on stage with that band, because then you play. You don't just flail around like trying to show off. You know, it's not about that. Yeah,
Oh, look, before we go, right, you've played for some great names. And I know you've done something with Phil Collins, which, that's, when we talk drummers, Phil Collins is generally up the top of them, at the sort of top of the list, isn't it? So tell us about that. It's a good place to end this.
Yeah, it was 2016, I think. Bob Knight fixed me on it. It was really funny. He was in, he said it's like being in the 80s again. He said, because normally Bob would have done that because, Bob set up an amazing business. He fixes for so many massive names now, and he plays for a lot of them, because he's in charge. So it's like happy days. And he was doing we were at BBC TV Centre. He was in one studio playing for Sting, and I was in the other playing for Phil. It's like fucking hell, it was a really weird day that, but it was for the Jonathan Ross show. It was we were doing Against All Odds, so I got sent the track, learned the track. He brought over Daryl Sturmer, who's his guitar player.
Right.
And he brought over his keyboard player as well, whose name escapes me at the moment, who's wonderful. He was Phil's MD for a long time. In fact, it was his birthday last week, and I sent him a little message. We've kind of stayed in touch. Lovely guy. And then it was me and a bass player that Bob had fixed. And it's like, God, this is Phil. When I first started getting into kind of more mainstream pop music, when I wasn't listening to big band, Phil was up there. That was what I was listening to, Genesis and Phil Collins. It was like, I love his songs, but his songs are so good, you sometimes forget how unbelievable he is as a player.
Yeah.
So you see him sort of come into the studio and you're like, that's Phil Collins. Oh my God. And at the time I was just kind of warming up at the drums, in the studio, and he came straight over and he's like, oh, what are you doing there? He's like, because at that time he wasn't playing anymore because of his injuries. And he's like, what are you doing there? I said, oh, it's just some warm up stuff. I said, I'm trying to channel my inner Buddy Rich. And he went, he said, yeah. He wasn't Phil Collins anymore. He was just another drummer talking to me about Buddy Rich and about all the guys, and I'm still going, yeah, but you're Phil Collins. It's like, it was really weird. And then we played the chart a couple of times, and then we recorded it. And it was just like, I better remember this because this ain't going to happen again, And then afterwards, I hung with him a little bit in the green room. But he was, it was sad really because I'd been to see him in 2004 at Wembley. And he was, they did 2.5 hours on stage, and every song you knew the words to. It was like,
was that with Ricky Lawson?
No, it was Chester.
Oh, Chester, right, okay.
I think Ricky died Ricky was still alive then, but he wasn't doing that gig.
Right.
I think what happened was Lee Sklar was doing it along with Chester, and then Ricky took over for a while, and it was all of Nathan East's lot did it.
Right.
And then they got busy with something else, and Sklar came back, and Chester came back. Luis Conti was on it as well.
Oh, fabulous! He's been on.
Brilliant guy. But it was just phenomenal. But then to see him in 2016, a few years later, and he's walking with a cane because of his back injury. He's not playing drums anymore. But he still, the voice was still there. It was like, it was that moment where you put your in-ears in and you're hearing this voice live that you've listened to since you were a kid. It's a mad feeling. It really is a mad feeling.
I can't imagine.
Yeah, that was a real highlight. And just to chat to him as a drummer and get the chance to thank him for everything he's done. I got to hang a little bit in LA with Lee Sklar when I used to go to the NAMM show quite a lot. And for a while, Neil Wilkinson was living out there. And I knew Neil, and Neil was working a lot with Lee Sklar. So we had a night eating pizza at Lee Sklar's house, which was just, again, another surreal moment. And you can ask Sklar about anyone. I was asking him about Carlos Vega, about Jeff Porcaro, about all the guys, he's worked with everyone, that there is to know. And I said, so who's your favourite? He said, well, Jeff and Carlos are two of my favourites. But he said the one frustrating thing about doing Phil Collins gig is that one of the best drummers in the world with the deepest pockets in the world is out front singing lead vocals. He said,
What a compliment.
I know. I want him back here with me on drums. It's like, wow, okay. And I sort of, after that, I went back and I re-listened to all the Genesis stuff and all the Phil Collins 80s and 90s records. And of course, in the studio versions, it's him playing. It's not Chester. It's him putting all the drums down. He's just, the sound, the feel, the groove, everything is just, it's as good as anyone. It's as good, people do forget how good he is and was. There's a documentary on Netflix at the moment about the making of the Band-Aid Christmas Feed the World.
Seen it.
You've seen that bit where he's playing the drums, he's playing that groove.
Oh, you don't quite understand what's involved in that till you see that, and it's like, whoa.
It's just, yeah, love it.
And the Drumeo thing.
It's coming out, isn't it? The 18th.
We're recording on the 17th. This won't be out for a few weeks yet, but yeah, it's coming out tomorrow, so it's going to be worth a watch.
Definitely.
Oh, Elliott, this has been a joy, mate. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, mate. It's wonderful to chat.
It's an absolute pleasure, and it's been a little bit different. This one, we've talked about things that perhaps some drummers who watch this might go, I don't know what they're talking about. If you're not used to reading and playing with MDs and stuff, then but I hope you get something from it, and it's been a good one. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. So have a great Christmas,
and we'll catch up in the new year. If you're only in North Wales, mate, you're not that far from me, so we should try and have a proper hang.
Definitely. Thanks, Elliott. I'll see you soon, mate.
Matey, take care.
Okay, bye now.